Well, I'm 55 years old, married with no children. I'm a retired IT professional with some dog training background. I was born and raised in the Philadelphia area, and I live there half the year and spend the balance of the year in Vermont. I have had some contact with paranormal here and there, with at least one Bigfoot encounter and a few possible brushes with a ghost or two. I have and continue to spend a lot of time outdoors, hiking and camping and hunting and fishing. As a Boy Scout and was involved in a few outdoor clubs, and I've also done some urban exploration. I'm very much at home in the woods, and I've solo camped just about all over the country, but mostly on the East Coast.
I've got to tell you, Dave, after hearing all the things you've done and hearing about all the things you've been through, you definitely haven't had a boring life.
Well, that's a good thing.
I'd say so. You've researched various paranormal topics over the years. Please tell us about the research you've done.
Well, the topic always interested me about different animals than the norm and different things out there. I would read up on it as much as I could and, with the internet, check the internet and talk to people who were involved in it, which I had found out whether they were or not through various research. And once an idea interests me, I tend to follow it pretty closely. And if I can't get to the information I need just through reading it, I try to experience it as well. And so I've really checked out the Bigfoot encounter issue, and I've gone into some of the paranormal as far as the ghost phenomenon, and just wanted to find out all I could about it, and then I was able to draw my own conclusions.
From talking with you in the pre-interview and other times, I'm convinced that you do have the right kind of mind that a researcher would want to have for investigating these things. So if you do decide to jump into this, which from our talks before we got underway here, it sounds like you have an interest in becoming a researcher for the North America Dogman Project, I've got no doubts that you're going to do really well at that.
Well, thanks. I was impressed with their website and some of the things I had heard about it, and I think that you really need to have an open mind going into anything, but also you need to have a good sense of discipline and control when dealing with anything, but so much more so with the unknown.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think you're right on the money. When you camped in the Daniel Webster National Forest and the New Jersey Pine Barrens, both places creeped you out. What happened in those places that made you feel that way?
Well, I had done a lot of solo camping, and I was still doing that, with hiking involved or not, backpacking into remote areas. And I never really felt uncomfortable doing that. But those two places, for some reason, really gave me a hard time. You go in and set up camp and go about normal routines, and as you settle in toward the end of the evening, and as I did at these places, I'm used to a lot of animal noise and even possibly the occasional eyes looking at you from the bushes. But in these particular places, what got me was the complete lack of noise. The insects stop, the noise stops, you can't hear anything at all, and I really felt in each of these places a very profound watched feeling. And being alone and in the middle of nowhere and miles from civilization, start to really get uncomfortable about that. And yeah, the Daniel Webster Forest in Vermont, that was definitely creepy. And the Pine Barrens as well, they both had their own different feel, but it was the same level of watchfulness, I think, that really creeped me out.
It is strange when you're used to having all these ambient noises that most of us are used to day in, day out. When you go out to a place like that can be that quiet, it's kind of unnerving.
Well, it's usually not quiet. That's the thing. You have the insect noises and the animal noises and rustlings and breaking of branches and wind in the trees and such, and you get used to that when you're out there. And when it becomes completely silent for long stretches of time, that's when it starts to worry me.
Yeah, that would shake anyone up. The next question's kind of tied into that. Before you swore off camping in a tent, you had some unsettling experiences. Please tell us about them.
Well, yeah, it does tie into those places, and maybe in general as far as tent camping. It never bothered me. In fact, I would sometimes camp without the tent, just a sleeping bag and maybe a cover for my head area, because I enjoyed it so much being out there. But those times, when I was in the tent and I was bedding down for the evening, there was a lot of other noises. There was silence in the forest, but there was a lot of noise as walking around the tent, bipedal walking, if that's the right word. Sounds like 2 legs, 4 legs, walking and circling the tent. And I started to feel that, well, maybe just a few millimeters of fabric isn't quite enough between me and the rest of this world. So I started to think that maybe I needed to get off the ground and put something harder between me and the rest of the forest.
I know the night that you had that encounter with those dogmen, I know you had to be awfully glad that you had given up tent camping and you had an Airstream behind you. Thank goodness.
Yeah, absolutely.
In 2009, you went on an expedition with the BFRO. Did anything eventful happen?
Well, that was a really nice trip. It's nice to get out into the woods and into the surrounding countryside with people, without people, and a great group of people there. And we spent a couple of nights out in some remote areas, and I think it was the last night. We were just sitting around, normal camping, and while some of the other guys were out walking around, I happened to scan the surrounding forest with a thermal camera, and probably about 10 or 15 yards from where we were sitting, I saw something behind a tree. The thermal was a black-white thermal, and this was all white, so it had nothing on except its fur, and you could see the fur and the tips of it, and it was standing behind a tree and peeking out from the side and looking on either side and looking over the top of it. And I knew it couldn't be a human because of the way it looked, and I knew that we were remote and untold where we were, so it wouldn't have been anybody on the outside. And since the thermal portrayed the shape and substance of whatever it was so well, I didn't think it was a costume of any kind. So what got me was that when it looked at me, and I saw it look right at me because there was eye shine, and there was one big round orb that flashed right at me, and I saw that, and I knew that we had made eye contact from the distance, and it got me right in the stomach. It was the first time that I think I had made that kind of contact with that kind of thing. That was pretty exciting. I mean, it was a little scary, but once I got over that, I thought it was pretty exciting. If anything, it made me more interested and has pointed me in the direction of cryptozoology in an all-encompassing manner, because now I've learned there's not just one kind. I mean, I had heard about other things all over the world, and I didn't really give it a lot of thought here in North America, but now I believe there's more than just one entity out in North America, so we'll cover more than one thing here.
Oh, sure there is. You can almost take your pick when it comes to cryptids around here anymore. And we're finding out about new ones all the time, it sure seems like.
Yeah.
Later that year, you and your wife Lisa went to North Carolina, and that's when you had your dogman encounter. Please tell us how this all went down.
Well, back in 2009, it was in October. I remember the date very well. It was my 49th birthday. My wife Lisa and I were very fond of camping, and ever since we met, we have camped just about everywhere east of the Mississippi that has a national forest or a nice state park. We decided that since tent camping was a game for younger bones, we entered into the realm of travel trailers. After looking at many, we decided upon an Airstream. And they are really nice and on the expensive side, but we intended to get a lot of use out of it. We got a 25-footer so that we could fit into just about any campground. It has full hookups, but we never really used anything but the electric, and hardly that. Plus, we installed solar panels because we intended to dry camp 100% of the time. I traded in my 250 and bought an F350 because we wanted a little more power towing the trailer. It's an old joke among Airstream owners that you have a $60,000 trailer pulled by a $50,000 truck looking for a free campsite. So, well, as I said, we were older now and we had more resources and decided to go that way. So we embarked on a tour of the East Coast National and State Parks that year, and we would sometimes stay for a week or two in a place, and sometimes we'd spend just a day or two moving around. And sometimes we didn't even unhook the trailer. We just pulled it around with us to use it as a resource. We both have a lot of outdoor experience. I was a Boy Scout and spent a lot of time hiking and camping, either with friends or alone. And I was pretty aware of strange things in the wilds, especially at night, but sometimes in the daylight. I had said that there were some weird places that I had visited. Most were pretty normal, but like I said, the Daniel Webster Forest in Vermont, Pine Barrens in New Jersey, just to name two, were pretty strange. Well, with my wife, we experienced nothing really that strange together, but one particular time, we decided to go to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. We had no plan, so we just kind of wung it. And we traveled slowly as usual, staying at campgrounds along the way, though usually state parks, as they seem to be a bit quieter. So we made our way south, and we steered toward the coast. Now, we crossed into North Carolina from Virginia, and we saw that it was getting close to dusk, and we picked out the closest state park, which happened to be Pettigrew State Park near the Picasso Lakes National Wildlife Refuge near Phelps Lake. As it got dark, we passed through a couple of dark towns, and a few miles from the park, we passed through a town called Cresswell. And this was pretty dark, too. I was surprised that there weren't any lights in town. So I stopped along the road. I uncovered my off-road lights so we could see better, and we continued on. Around a corner, when we came into town, there was this big house, and as we approached, we saw about 15 people in the yard, and it was pitch dark. And before my lights came around to the scene, it must have been really dark there, and we looked at each other and thought, well, why would you hang out in the dark like that? But as we went by, they all stopped and stared at us. We went by and gave us a weird feeling, too. And as I went by, the last guy on the lawn looked at me and said, good luck. I thought, oh, no. Yeah, that's not good. So we got our way down to Pettigrew, and we got there just as the park ranger was leaving. And there was only one other camper there, and they were talking together. The place was kind of wet. It had rained a bit. There weren't many trees except by the lake. It was just kind of swampy. And we asked what it was like there, and the ranger looked at the other guy, and he looked around. He was kind of nervous, and he said, okay, pretty good. I promised to be back at sunrise. And he seemed pretty nervous, and the other guy seemed pretty nervous, and we looked at each other and said, oh, maybe we'll give this one a miss. And the other guy said, well, you're not staying? Well, neither am I. I'm not staying another night. And he got back and started breaking camp, and we're thinking, well, that's kind of weird. So maybe it was the right decision. So we left there, and we drove toward Roanoke Island, because we figured, well, since we're so far away from really any state park or where we're going to go, maybe we'll stay in a store parking lot. We often do that. Since there were no other parks nearby and all that, so we're not going to boondock in the swamp, so we're going to try for something in civilization. So we headed down Route 94 and crossed the Alligator River and drove into the middle of the Alligator National Park. So that, again, having lived in Pennsylvania my whole life and camping mostly in the north, the thought of large man-eating lizards were kind of new to me, and I felt a little uneasy just at the reality of that type of predator. So we drove through the night, and we were looking up the park on our phones, and we read about this red wolf. It was a critically endangered species that was reintroduced to the park a few years ago, and no one had seen it in a while. And we were almost to Man's Harbor, which is right on the bridge over to the island, and we saw this dog walking toward us, and we looked at each other, and boy, didn't it look just like a red wolf, and we had just read about that, and it was just so amazing. So I'd say it was about 1 a.m., and we're almost to the ocean, probably about 10 miles out. Driving along, and I hear this loud thunk on the trailer, and I thought, what a place. I really didn't want to get out here. But I decided I should go take a look. So I stopped and I left the truck running, and I grabbed my 357, holstered it, and walked out. And I went out and I checked the truck and I checked the trailer. And I didn't see anything obviously wrong. Thought maybe I just ran over a branch or something. And then I saw a dent in the trailer just below the right taillight. Well, I checked it, and while I was looking at it, the hair on the back of my neck stood straight out, and all the insect noises stopped. And I knew about that feeling, having had that feeling before. And I got a little nervous. I kind of knew that there was something near me, either staring at me or in the area, and something odd. It was kind of like a predator feeling, like a mountain lion, coyote feeling. You know what that is. So I slowly turned around, and I didn't see anything at first. And the feeling got stronger, rather uncomfortable. So I pulled the gun out. I still didn't see anything, but I started to hear some rustling and water noises. And so I focused in the direction of that, and I saw a dark shape behind some scrub bushes. And as my sight sharpened, I saw a familiar shape. It looked like I was looking right at one of my German Shepherds. But this one was reddish black. It was very large. And it had very large ears with looked like tufts of hair sticking up. And they were both facing me like little radar dishes. And it had its front paws on a rock, and it was crouching behind the rock. And I noticed that one of the ears was light gray and bent over a little bit. It looked very out of place for this guy who was pretty much consistently dark everywhere else. So our eyes met, that eyes met feeling again like the one I had had before, but this time it wasn't very pleasant. I got a chill. And what I was looking at, I thought, was the look of a hunter, no emotion, and that kind of scared me. It looked to my left, its right, and moved a little bit forward. And then it did something that really haunts me to this day. I saw a deer do it once, thought it was crazy then. Well, it lurched back onto its rear legs, and then there were these two distinct popping sounds as it straightened up. Well, then I really saw him. He was somewhat muscular above the waist, with hair like a mane around his shoulders. His fur was reddish, though it was dark with black streaks. He had yellow predator eyes, which I can pretty much still see as well. Pointed ears, and his paws had fingers and claws on the end, and very long muscular arms. His lower half was thinner and kind of strange canine legs, and I thought I saw a short tail. And I said, wow, this is the stuff of nightmares. I wondered if I was really seeing this thing. And then it made some noise. It was a low growling, and then it looked to its right again. I followed its gaze, and I saw another one. And this one was very dark. It was on all fours and moving to my left. And I thought, that looks like a flanking maneuver. I think it was time to go. And so the one in the front took another step, and he showed his teeth. And I could see them in the moonlight glinting at me. In fact, if I think about it, I can still see them. Well, I backed away toward my truck, and I glanced to my left again, and I still heard the other one, but I couldn't see him anymore. Well, that wasn't good. So I reached the truck backwards, and I saw that the first one had reached the road, and he had 1 foot or paw or whatever it was on the road. And I took aim at him, and I fired. I was pretty shaken up. So I'm a pretty good shot, and I was aiming at his head. But he moved at the last minute, and I'm sure that I hit him in the shoulder. it was he didn't react like I thought he would, getting hit with a gun of that caliber. It was almost like I punched him, nothing more. And I had the distinct feeling that I think I just made him mad. So, but he did stop, and the other one stopped. So I used that time to get in the truck. Honestly, I don't remember getting in the truck. My wife was in there in a state of panic because of the shot, and also because she had really never seen me frightened before, and she said I was shaking. I don't remember getting in. I don't remember putting the truck in gear. I don't remember taking off, but I was, and I was moving pretty well, and the truck was pretty powerful as it was, and always made light of the trailer load. So I looked in my mirrors, and I saw one on each side of the truck in the road, and at least another one behind each of them. And I thought, oh no, there's 4 of them. Well, they stayed with me up to about 30, 35 miles an hour. And then they slowed down, and they just veered back into the swamp and were gone. So I didn't stop or really talk until I crossed the bridge and got on the Roanoke. I pulled into the Menteo shopping center, and I stopped. Then I looked at Lisa, and I told her what I saw. And she said she didn't see anything, but she admitted she was looking at her phone when I was back there. Well, I'm really glad she didn't get out, or she didn't see them. I don't think I would have ever gotten her out of the house again. I decided not to go into too much detail because of that, and I just told her I fired a warning shot at a predator. So we were on Roanoke, and we stayed in the grocery store parking lot that night. A lot of businesses allow overnight stays by truckers and campers. They figure that you'll wake up and shop in the morning, and that's usually what happens. I know that Walmart and Cracker Barrel and places like that, they have special parking for trailers, and they just ask that you park so that the store cameras are toward your doors overnight. So we stayed there. We had a pretty uneventful night, except I had some really bad dreams about you-know-what. I kept seeing them really clearly in my dreams. And the thing that kept repeating in my dream, and like I said, it still bothers me, is when I think of them, is the actual point in which they stand up. Maybe it's the popping sound. It's like an abnormal move, and they do it anyway. And the eyes, of course, just kind of glowing yellow. I'd seen predator eyes before, but these were different. So they seemed to run faster and maybe quieter on 4 legs from what I saw. And they seemed to shift effortlessly between 4 legs and like a half crouch. But from what I saw, they seemed to have to stop completely to stand completely up. At least the one in front of me did. So I woke up from that in a sweat. But we went into the grocery store in the morning, and of course everybody was staring at us, but that's not unusual. So we got our groceries, and we came back out, and we put them in the trailer. And Lisa got in her side, and I was walking around the trailer on my side, and I saw this truck in the parking lot in front of me, and the driver had me in a dead stare, and it was decidedly unfriendly. So there were several things I could have done at that point, so I decided to ask him what was up. And as soon as I started to talk, he completely fell apart and started apologizing to me. He said that I was a carbon copy of a friend of his, and he thought he was messing with him. And we laughed, and I asked him about the island and the surrounding area, and he told me that the normal tourist stuff, and told me about a couple of good restaurants. So I looked at him, and I looked at the rifle rack in the back of his truck, and I decided to ask him about the swamp. When I told him that, he kind of rocked back on his heels and looked at me. He looked around, and he said that he thought he was the only one. Well, we proceeded to sit at the table in the camper and talk about it, and it seemed like he had exactly the same experience twice. His name was Eric. He described them right down to the bent gray ear on one of them. That was interesting. So he told me the first time he only saw one, but the second time he saw 2, maybe 3, and the second time he shot one. He said he hit it in the chest, and it didn't stop at all. And then he hit it in the leg, and it stopped and looked down. And then they all retreated. maybe that's good to know. Eric said that they had displayed hunting behavior. He said that he saw them on the mainland when he was out there hunting, and he also said he doesn't go there anymore. In fact, he said that he used to hunt everywhere in and around the swamp, and it seemed to him that since this dogman thing has come around, he doesn't go hunting, and he doesn't see anybody else going hunting either. So, we don't know. So I thought the same thing. I'd seen predators and all kinds of stuff my whole life being out there, but I never saw these guys. But then again, I never really looked for them either. Coyotes, bobcat, bear, mountain lion, gator, snakes, gator for him. We all knew them, but we never saw these before, and they were definitely different. He told me that a friend of his was a Bigfoot researcher, and he had been out with him a couple of times, and they said they had a pretty good time doing it, and they never really felt seriously in danger. But since they started seeing dogman, it's put a real damper on their things, and they seemed that it diminished their activity somewhat. So I bought them lunch, and the three of us enjoyed the lunch, and I didn't really mention it again. And then Lisa and I left, and we went to Fort Raleigh, the north end, and then we went down to Kill Devil Hills, weird name, and we checked out the Kitty Hawk First Flight area. And I started to put the whole thing out of my mind. Being in civilization is real good for that. We kept the trailer hooked up, and we acted like hermit crabs for a while out there and dragging the trailer around with us. So we stayed one more night at Menteo, and then we drove down to the Outer Banks, and we had a great time. It's a great place. We went between the seasons, and it was pretty quiet. So we drove as far as we could. The road ran out, and we settled down at this campground at the end called Frisco Woods. It was closed, but I called the owner, and he told me to stay as long as I wanted to, and that the electric was on, and that was cool. It was really a nice place. We unhooked the trailer and set up our camp, and we could see the bay and the ocean at the same time. I had a pretty good time, and I was wary of the alligators, of course, and I had dogmen in the back of my mind, but didn't seem to be any predators on the Outer Banks. So we stayed for about a week, and we headed back. Unless you take a ferry, there's really only one way on and off of the islands. Right before we left the area, we dry camped and hooked up one more time. We were off of Roanoke and onto the mainland near Mans Harbor. And we stayed at a nameless business there on Ferry Dock Road. And we didn't really venture out after dark. Before we went in, the owner told us we should stay inside after midnight and didn't say anything else, so he didn't have to tell me. So in the middle of the night, I got up and decided to look outside. Never a good idea to look outside in the middle of the night, but I did it anyway because I thought I heard some stealthy movement outside. I didn't see anything. But I did, before I went back, thought I saw two eyes on the edge of the woods. And, of course, the insects stopped again. They're about maybe 4 or 6 feet off the ground, I could say, from where I was. I could have been wrong. But after a while, they were gone, and the noise started again. If it had been any other time, I would have dismissed it as totally normal. But since the events of the week before, I was really nervous now. So in the morning, we woke up, we thanked the guy, and we hit the road. There was no sign of the creature anywhere, and I was happy about that. The guy saw me looking around, and he looked at me, and he didn't say anything. And I started to say something, and he put his finger up to his mouth. I said, okay, I'm not going to say anything. So we were driving through, and right before, we left North Carolina. We took 64 to 32, and then we were in Virginia back by the Great Dismal Swamp, and we went to Suffolk, eventually Norfolk. A few times I thought I saw some creatures running along the side with the truck, but that was probably my imagination. When I looked, they weren't there. But when I did, right before I left, I slowed down, and I stopped, and I looked back at the swamp, and I almost swear that I saw a dogman in the swamp watching me leave. Now, that didn't make me feel good either. So the experience has made me much more aware of my surroundings. I look over my shoulder a lot. I examine the woods thoroughly at all times. I guess that's good. I thought I was doing that, but I guess it wasn't. So I went about and I researched the phenomenon for a long time. It may seem that I may have opened myself up a little bit, but maybe I didn't. I mean, I must have been there all the time. So after a while, I got brave enough to tell my story to my two best friends, and they teased me a little bit, but they knew me well enough to know I was serious. One of them spends a lot of time outdoors, and his property backs up to a large wooded area on the outskirts of Lake Nakamixon, which is about 30 miles north of Philadelphia. And he started to tell me that he had some strange occurrences on his property. He said he wanted to tell me about it after I told him my story. He thought people would think he was crazy, but now he felt comfortable enough. His property is irregularly shaped in about 20 acres, I'd say. And as I said, it's attached to a large park surrounding a reservoir. The area's got a real long history. It's sacred to the tribe of Native Americans that live there. And there's a bunch of stone structures nearby in the lands, and there's a couple roads named after them. So he began to tell me that over the last month he started hearing strange noises at the back of his property. He didn't have a large fence, just enough to mark the property, and his dogs are actually pretty friendly, so the fence wasn't really meant for them. It's just to mark things out. So he was hearing snarling and baying in the back, like wild dogs. And in the back of his property, he had this shed that he used to process deer, and it was damaged. Somebody had broken into it, but it was scratched and clawed and torn up, and he didn't think that was human damage. So he had repaired it, but something broke in again. So he decided to watch the house with binoculars and see what was disturbing the shed. He thought it might be a bear, but there's no bear in the county. I guess it's not unheard of, but there wasn't. So he started watching, and one night the surrounding forest, of course, got quiet, just that whole thing, and his dogs, who are usually very alert, put their heads down, put their tails between their legs, and ran down the basement. He said, uh-oh. So he was watching the shed with binoculars, and he thought he saw a shadow move. And as he watched, he swore that he saw a wolf-like creature, his words, walking on two legs. So he said he shook his head, and he said the sight scared him a bit, more than anything he'd remember. And he considered going out with a shotgun, but he thought better of it. The next day he went out to the shed, and the dogs seemed pretty normally. Didn't see any damage, but he found some tracks. So he told me this story, and I went out to the house with him, and we looked at the shed. And there were people hiking around and stuff during the day, and everything seemed pretty normal. So that night we built a fire, and we sat in his backyard, and we were watching. And we didn't see anything, but there were a couple of times during the night that insects stopped, and there was that weird, eerie feeling like we were being watched. So I told him I had an idea. I told him to start processing his deer somewhere else. Kind of a pain, but if he was going to continue living there, I think that it might be better. So we cleaned the shed, wiped down with bleach solution, and repurposed it. And after that, the activity kind of stopped. I don't know whether they disappeared, but the activity stopped. We didn't feel it again. So I think he's pretty fortunate, because in my heart, when I had my encounter and what I saw, I think once they were there, they were going to stay. And I don't know, maybe they would follow you home. And that's a real sobering thought. It's strange how you can tell the difference between a Bigfoot, a predator, human, dogman. Each one has a completely different feeling, but the dogman to me holds like a kind of a terror feeling, like the alligator, but much worse. It's almost like an instinctual fear, but I never really saw it on the other two trips or on my friend's property, but my senses told me that it was the same feeling that I had in the Allegheny National Park. I have to say that I've had that feeling a couple times too, in rather small patches of woods, surprisingly near Philadelphia. That sounds really creepy, but when you know you're being watched, and I know the feeling now. So again, I'm hoping that you follow me home. So we still love to go camping and be out in the woods, but I'm always very wary, even if I don't tell my or higher, and she's pretty used to that anyway. We tend to stay up north a bit more, and as it seems to be not as prevalent there.
I'll tell you what, Dave, for you to continue camping the way you do, travel trailer or not, you've got to have some serious sand. How close were these dogmen to you when you first saw them that night?
I'd say, though, the first one I saw, I'd say he was about 20, 25 yards maximum. Yeah, I'd say about 20 yards. Slightly downhill.
At their closest, how close did they get?
Well, I don't make a habit of shooting things, but when I shot him, he was less than 10 yards from me.
Ooh, yeah, that's way too close for comfort.
That's why I shot him. I might have even considered a warning shot, but again, I thought I knew, I don't think a warning shot's going to do this guy any good at all. And I didn't like the way he looked at all. I mean, it wasn't just the look, obviously the way he looked, but when he showed his teeth at me, I said, well, that's it. It was kind of a live or die moment, I thought. So, him or me, it's going to be him.
Yeah, I can't say I'll blame you there. After going through an experience like that, it's no wonder you had all those nightmares that night. Wow. How did your wife react when you got back in the truck and told her about encountering that, as you put it, predator?
Well, I didn't want to spook her because we still had a whole week of camping ahead of us. I mean, I still had a little presence of mind that way, but, she was a little freaked out because she never really saw me scared like that before. I mean, not like that. I was literally shaking. My hands were shaking. Even though I was grabbing the wheel, my hands were shaking. But I told her kind of what I saw. And then as I was saying it and I was watching her eyes get bigger, I thought, well, maybe I'll just sugarcoat it a little bit. And I just told her it was a predator and I shot at it, because I still wanted to camp the rest of the week. Believe me, the thought about turning around and going home was definitely in my mind, but I didn't think I wanted to give her the whole gory detail. Not at that time, anyway.
Yeah, if you had told her about what you had encountered that night, I don't think she would have agreed to go camping anymore after that, so I can understand. But it's funny, because you did still tell her the truth. You told her you encountered a predator, so there's no lie there.
It's true.
Who handled your encounter better, you or your wife?
Well, I guess I did the true encounter. I mean, I thought she did pretty well with my version of it afterward, but, I did eventually tell her about it, and I don't think she handled it well at all, actually. And I think I handled it better knowing about it and then still going back out and convincing her to go back out. So I'd say it was me.
Yeah, it does sound that way. How long did you wait to tell your wife about what you actually saw that night?
Well, I waited till we were comfortably back in the Philadelphia area. I waited till we were surrounded by civilization and everything seemed pretty safe as it was around us. And then I told her pretty much everything. I don't think I left much out. I mean, I think I left out possibly the teeth and the eyes and my feelings about them, but I definitely described them to her. So probably about a week. Let her settle in.
It sounds like you did make a wise choice waiting that long to let her know about that. Waiting until you're home compared to telling her about what happened when you're still out there, that probably was a good move.
Well, I think so. I mean, I really think that if I would have told her everything that I was feeling, we would have just been on the way home. I mean, we had a nice time, and that's good, and it was a great trip, but I think it would have been a rather short one if I went into detail.
Oh, I'll bet you're right on that. You're especially haunted by a couple of things that happened that night. What are those things?
Well, the eyes bother me, and that's kind of surprising to me because, I'm used to seeing things in the woods and other places, canyons and plains, and, I've looked into the eyes of predators before, and it wasn't the same as this. They were very yellow, and there was a lot of light. There was a full moon that night, and there was a lot of, ambient light in the area. Even though it was swamp, there was quite a bit of light. Maybe it was reflecting off of the water. But these eyes were very bright and glowing, and they had, I wouldn't say emotion, but they had intent, and that bothered me. The other thing that bothered me, there was the teeth. When he showed his teeth, that was a shock to my system, kind of a ice pick to the stomach feeling. But I think the thing that bothered me the most is when he stood up on 2 feet. I mean, that was just so alien and so weird. I mean, if it was down on 4 legs, I could have maybe even dismissed it as a wolf. Wolf in the swamp? I just read about the red wolf, but this was bigger than that. The red wolf was described as something much smaller. But when it stood up, I don't even think I could describe that feeling. It just kind of lurched up, and it seemed to settle in, like it stopped and popped its legs into place. And those popping sounds, I swear I can still hear them. It was the weirdest sound, and I'm looking at it in my mind right now as I'm telling you. It was the weirdest look, and his eyes never left me. It wasn't like it distracted him to do it. He did it, and he was staring me dead on while he was doing it, as if, I don't know, as if he thought I would be surprised by it. I don't know what he thought, but it really bothers me, and I can really honestly see it really clearly in my mind.
Well, I could understand why that would bother you. For those 4 dogmen, do you have any size estimates? I understand that you were in total shock, but any guesstimates on how big they were, height, how wide they were?
Yeah, I was pretty surprised. I mean, I had a real good look at the one in front of me originally, and I had a pretty good look at the one that I thought was flanking. I saw the other 2 back there, but they were more shadowy than anything. I could see them moving. Seemed to be on all 4s behind the other 2. 2 on each side, coming up each side, and that was pretty scary too, actually. I didn't know whether they were going to outrun me, come along the side of the truck. I mean, anyway. I'd say the first guy, he was 25 yards away, slightly downhill. When he stood up, I'd probably put him at like 6 or 7 feet. Easy, 7 feet. The one that was on all 4s coming around the side, I guess if he would have stood up, he wouldn't have been much shorter, but I think he was slightly smaller. And the other 2, I don't think I saw them well enough to give a height estimate, but they all seemed to be about the same size. So, 7 feet, standing straight up, which is kind of alien to begin with. You think about a 4-legged creature, but I mean, some of my dogs are pretty big if I get them up on 2 feet, but not that big.
That had to be quite the sight to see. Do you wish you had done anything differently when you had that encounter?
I don't know. I mean, part of me wants to have maybe done more damage, but part of me says no because I got away. I mean, maybe if it developed differently, it would have been different, but maybe I shouldn't have gotten out of the truck. But I guess that's pretty moot. Yeah, maybe that was the one thing. I shouldn't have gotten out of the truck. But I really can't, everything happened so quickly and developed along a timeline that was almost predetermined. I mean, it seemed to be marking time from the time I saw him to the time I got in the truck. Maybe it was practice behavior on their part, but it seemed like they were moving, I was retreating, and that was it. So I don't know what I could have done differently.
Yeah, judging from your conversation with the man in the parking lot, it sounds like encountering people is almost routine for them, so maybe they did have some sort of a routine down for when that sort of thing happened.
It's a scary thought.
Yes, it is. Very unsettling and scary. You're surprised by the fact they were in the Alligator National Forest. Why is that?
Well, I mean, the swamp isn't a place I would think there would be a large canine population. One, it's not entirely too far from civilization. It's a well-traveled area. It is a national forest, so I would think that there's park rangers and various environmentalists around. Also, there's alligators, and to me, I would think that some predators would avoid an alligator. I mean, from what I have read about them or I know about them, is they're a pretty stealthy hunter on their own, and I don't think I want to tangle with them, and I'm not sure whether anything else would. But it did surprise me that they were there. I mean, I guess I don't know where they would be at home, but it did surprise me.
Well, unfortunately, you'll find them in all sorts of places you wouldn't expect to see them. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. Well, I was pretty surprised that I thought it was 30 miles north of Philadelphia. You know, that area that I was with my friend was not exactly the wilderness. I mean, maybe it felt that way when you're in the woods, but a 10-minute walk in one direction and you're in the suburbs. So, you know, that was pretty weird.
Well, don't lose sight of the fact that they do come into the suburbs, and they've actually been seen inside the city limits of major cities like Cincinnati and Chicago, so that's been done before.
That's scary, too.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. They don't have any soft edges to them, that's for sure. You didn't think anyone had been attacked by dogmen before we talked for the first time. Why did you think that?
Well, I think I would have heard about it. I don't hear a lot about it as it is. It seems like there's kind of I don't want to say censor, but there seems to be a lack of information out there about Dogman, whereas there seems to be a lot of information about other cryptids like Bigfoot and some of the lake monsters and things like that. You tend to hear about them, but you don't hear a lot about this one. And if they were violent and people were getting hurt, I think we'd hear about it. So I was surprised to hear that there had been violent encounters.
When they do attack, they almost always seem to do it from behind, with a massive downward blow. Do you think one could have been behind you that you didn't see that night, setting you up for an attack like that?
Yeah, I think it's a real good possibility. I was very concerned about an attack. Actually, even though I say I'm surprised by it, their behavior said to me hunting, because I had hunted and I know what I would do if I was going to flush something out or if I wanted to set something up. And so I had the guy in front of me holding my attention. There's a guy flanking to one side. Behind me was my trailer. I mean, it's a big, 9-foot tall trailer. So something could have been behind me very easily, and I had no idea it was there. And I was at the north end of the swamp. The road cuts across the north end of it, and there's probably maybe a couple of miles from the road to the top of the peninsula. And then the rest of the park goes back probably another, 30 or 40 miles maybe. I don't know if it's that much, but quite a bit of territory, and anything could have been back there. So, I mean, I guess he would have had to come around the trailer or between the truck and the trailer, because I did pass by the hitch. That would have been now that I think about it, that would have been a perfect ambush point, but very possible, and another unsettling feeling for sure.
Well, I definitely hope there wasn't one back there trying to sneak up on you like that, but it's definitely possible. There just might have been.
They didn't seem to be there to play cards, let's put it that way. They were not there, in fact, not even just to skip. I thought, afterward that they might have just been trying to scare me out of their territory, but it seemed worse than that. It really did. I mean, if that was the case, maybe it would have been different. Maybe it would have just been a lot of noise and growling and flailing about, but this was kind of if I had to notice them, I mean, it was kind of stealthy. So, that might have been the case.
If you wouldn't have seen them, it sure does make you wonder how that would have played out. I hope it was just a bluff and they weren't looking to take you out, but I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, well, my back was to them to begin with. I was checking the trailer out, and I felt the presence behind me and turned around. So if I hadn't turned around, I don't know.
Well, thank goodness you did turn around.
Yeah, me too. I mean, that's the way I feel. I mean, that's what happens. I think a lot of predators, they do that. They set the prey up that way. And if I think about it as myself as the prey. But then again, a lot of creatures have a sixth sense at some time in their lives or in their makeup where a lot of things are aware and will turn around even when the predator's approaching. So who knows if they have a routine as far as that goes.
Well, thank goodness your instincts didn't fail you that night. In the pre-interview, you mentioned that you've noticed that the Sasquatch phenomenon is much more commonly accepted than the Dogman phenomenon. Is that a source of frustration for you?
Yeah, I think it is. Frustration maybe not have been the word I would have used prior, but it is now when I start to think that I'd like to get involved with research. I mean, I guess it took a long time for the Bigfoot phenomenon to gain the acceptance that it has. Back in, the 60s and 70s, it was still kind of a joke, and now it seems to have a pretty widespread appeal. And it is frustrating that there almost seems to be a censorship surrounding the Dogman encounter and a lot of, Wolfman jokes and things like that, and people not taking it seriously. And I guess there's still a lot of people who don't take Bigfoot seriously either. I mean, and that's another thing. I try not to call it that. I try and call it Sasquatch just to give it a more dignified name. But in the same way, people seem to ignore it a bit. Maybe it just needs to, and this is probably a horrible way to say this, but needs to come out more into the spotlight to be recognized more, and then it will gain more acceptance. But I'm not sure I want that to happen. So, I mean, kind of a jagged edge on that, but I think that it's the same thing. People see things, and they're not crazy. I mean, I guess some people are, but most people are stand-up guys and women and children and all kinds of people that are regular human beings that see these things. They come out and they tell people about it, and they're not telling you because they want to be ridiculed. They're telling you because they want you to know what they saw. And if somebody's telling you they saw a canine on two legs, that's pretty scary. And I would hope that people would take that seriously, but I guess it's going to take some time.
It is very scary. It is a dichotomy also. On one hand, for them to be more readily accepted by the general public, more encounters have to happen. On the other hand, more encounters would have to happen for that to be the case, so it really is a catch-22.
It is. It's sort of like installing the red light in a dangerous intersection. How many accidents do you have to have before the light goes in? It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. Do you get frustrated when you hear skeptics give reasons why creatures like dogmen can't exist?
Absolutely. But then again, it depends on their point of view. If they were out there and saw what we saw and researched, or even if they didn't research, if they just had an encounter, I can't see how they would remain skeptics. So, in my mind, a skeptic, a lot of times, is someone that's standing behind science or standing behind a preconception, or maybe even a learned position saying this doesn't exist because of this. But if they were out there and they saw it with their own two eyes, it would be hard to stand behind those criticisms, I would think. Kind of like a friend of mine who's a doctor who was very much against any kind of painkillers or pain relievers for his patients until he had a serious accident and had to go through some surgeries. And then overnight, he was a proponent of narcotics. So it's kind of the same thing. If you experience it, it's going to change your viewpoint. So in my mind, my experience, I think that a lot of skeptics and critics that haven't been out there and haven't seen it or come close or even brushed up against it don't really have what they need to pull it down so hard.
It's funny how that surgeon you mentioned felt about painkillers until he needed them himself.
Right. It's pretty much the same thing, I would think.
Yeah, I'd say it is. How intelligent do you think dogmen are now that you've had a chance to see them in action?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I guess maybe if I had more experience than just one type of behavior, but, at least canine intelligence and the experience I have with dog training, I'd say that a German Shepherd has the intelligence of maybe a 4 or 5 year old child. So, and that's nothing to scoff at. So I'd say they're very intelligent as far as it goes, maybe even more than we know. It's hard to say, but they're definitely displayed hunting behavior and coordination, so that's got to take something. I think that I don't think I'd want to pit myself against them. That's another way of putting it. I mean, I know that a grown man or woman with their faculties is pretty much superior to most things on the planet as far as intelligence, but some things are better at other things than we are. So as far as intelligence, I would say they are. Very.
Well, we'll never know for sure, but I think they are a lot more intelligent than most people would ever be comfortable knowing.
Well, I mean, there's a lot going on there. They, besides the hunting behavior, besides the coordination of attack, I think that they can work things out, problem solving. And anything that's problem solving has a higher intelligence than you would think, chimpanzee level. Just the fact that for whatever reason it's deciding to move on two legs is almost requiring an intelligence to do so, I would think. There's got to be an advantage there, and I guess you'd have to think about that.
Oh, I'd say so. You're dealing with your dogman encounter better than most people would. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I have spent a lot of time out in the wilds by myself and with others. And I really feel like the encounter instilled more of a curiosity than a fear over time. At first I was scared, and scared at a real base level. But over time I just became more and more curious about what this thing could possibly be, where it came from, how it's manifesting itself at this point. And my time in the woods has made me more experienced outside, in my mind anyway. And my curiosity for things like that, and also the fact that of the way I think. I mean, I don't really scare that easily, and I tend to want to try to work things out in my mind and come to grips with them on an ordered basis. And in order to do that, I have to eliminate fear from the equation.
Speaking of you spending time out in the woods, how has your behavior in the woods changed now that you know they're out there?
I'd like to say it hasn't, but it has. I would wish that it hadn't changed, because I think I was a little happier before I knew they were there. Happier is kind of a strange word to use, but I guess I was a little less concerned in the woods. I had mentioned that I think that, well, that there's that I didn't think there's a lot of things that can really harm you, besides a large predator in the woods. But now I've changed that idea. I've been researching and looking for Bigfoot in the woods, and even that has not frightened me that much. The initial encounter, that first time I saw one, well, probably the only time I saw one, but it initially scared me, but then I, again, became curious, and now I'm ultra curious. But with this guy, I'm definitely looking over my shoulder. When I go into the woods, I usually scan them pretty well. Now I'm scanning them maybe 10 times more than I was. And I'm looking at them a little differently and checking shadows where I didn't before, and possible hiding places and high ground and things I wouldn't have done before, but I'm doing it now. And if I'm camping, I'll settle in, but I'll still keep aware of my surroundings. And if I get up and go out, I'm going to check just a little bit more than I would have. It's not going to keep me out of the woods, but it's going to make me want to check them out a lot more and scrutinize my surroundings more.
Your response and mindset after having the experiences you've had with these things is totally understandable. I mean, with dogmen like the ones you ran into that night, there is no middle ground. You're not going to have any type of an understanding with them. That's just not going to happen. With Sasquatch, I guess on some occasions you might be able to have some form of a middle ground, so that all does make good sense.
I think you're absolutely correct. I think that it's a different entity entirely. And in some ways, I think we have to give one more of a birth or a respect than the other. And I don't mean that on a species level. I mean, on a species level, I should say. I mean, It's not that I would lose respect for Sasquatch, but yes, I think there could be a middle ground with them, and there could be a communication factor with them. But I don't think there's any communication factor with the Dogman phenomena. I can't imagine there would be. Not from my experience. Maybe somebody else has another idea about that. But as far as I'm concerned, it's either you're in their sight or you're not. And I think being in their sights is not a good thing.
Are you surprised by the fact you've become so fascinated by the topic now that you've had that encounter?
No, I don't think I'm surprised. If I'm surprised by anything, I think it would be maybe my level of interest, because my interest in Sasquatch is pretty high, and I'm interested in finding out more about them and researching them in their habitat and possibly having more encounters. Whereas with the Dogman, yes, I'm interested in them, and I'm interested in what makes them tick, but I'm not sure I'm interested in having more one-on-one encounters with them.
That makes sense. You're a self-proclaimed dog person, Dave. You were surprised by the fact that there was no communication between you and those dogmen. Please tell us more about your feelings on that.
Yeah, well, I have trained dogs over the years. I've trained my dogs. I've trained dogs for other people. And I do feel a connection to the dog. I think there's definitely a way to communicate with canines, and ones they understand quite well. They're definitely a pack behavior with an alpha at the head of that pack, and they understand that quite well. And they're quite loyal in that surrounding. And with the training, I have definitely communicated with dogs extremely well. They can understand me, I can understand them, and it's a very nice relationship. When I encountered the Dogman, there was none of that. There was no chance at communication. He looked at me, and he was not seeing someone he wanted to communicate with. He wasn't seeing someone he wanted to share emotions with. I don't even know if he had emotions. He looked at me either as intruder or food was the look I got. And I don't think I was going to change that view in any way. I certainly wasn't going to talk to him in a funny voice and have him respond to it. No. It definitely surprised me in some ways and didn't surprise me in others. I mean, I guess I wouldn't talk that way to a wolf in the wild either. But this was a little different. This was a very focused gaze, and it wasn't friendly at all.
Yeah, I don't think trying to baby talk those dogmen that night would have had the desired effect, like if you were trying to baby talk one of your German shepherds or something like that.
No.
Yeah, I'd say not. Do you think going on that BFRO expedition opened you up to experiences such as your dogman encounter and other things?
Well, I'm not sure if I can say that any experience on its own would open a person up to more things, but I think that the person themselves may open up because they feel connected more because they look at things differently. And it definitely made me look at things differently, and the more I look at things differently, the more I see, and the more I see, the more experiences I have. So, yes, it did open me up to more. Whatever the reason or the method or the circumstance that went around for that to happen, yes, it definitely opened me up, I would say.
You know, Dave, it's funny how when something like that that's so traumatic and so awful happens in your life, at the moment, it's hard to glean anything positive from that experience, but I really do believe it's really hard to find any experience that you're going to have in life that's all bad. And almost any experience that you're going to have, I really do believe that you can get at least one positive thing out of it. That experience that you had that night, it did cause you to open up more and pay more attention to your surroundings and consequently get more out of life.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if anything, to look around more and enjoy your life and the surroundings of your life more just from being more aware of things, especially if they're not around.
Yeah, I'd say. You're scheduled to go on another BFRO expedition later this year. Do you have any trepidation about going on it after having that dogman encounter?
No, I don't think I'd call it trepidation. Like I said before, I'm going to be more aware of my surroundings, and I'm going to survey them a little bit more than I normally would. But I think I said earlier that I'm not sure whether the two mix. I'm not sure whether we're going to find the two of them in the same place. I mean, I'm by no means an expert, quotation marks, on this, but if I'm going to go to an area that's a hotbed of Sasquatch activity, I'm not expecting to find them there. I'm hoping that it's going to be a completely different experience, and I'm not really having any trepidation going into this.
Well, that's good. At least after having these experiences, you can still get out there in the bush and still enjoy yourself, so that's a good thing. Tell us more about your interest in becoming a researcher for the North America Dogman Project. I'd like to hear more about that.
Well, I had looked around at a lot of different cryptozoological organizations. There are plenty of them out there, and I suppose that you could have an interest in many things at once. I looked at a few, and I saw that I liked a lot of the things that I saw on the website, and I had heard a couple of interviews from the people in the group, and it sounded like something that I wanted to become part of because I'd already been interested. And my interest grows, if anything. And, you know, a situation or an encounter like I had, I mean, some people might go the other way. This has actually made me more interested in it. And what I said before is there seems to be like a lockdown on the information about Dogman. And I feel that it needs to get out there. We need to have more researchers in the field. We need to have more people working on this to bring it to light even more than it is. I definitely want to be involved in that and be one of those people. I think that I have the right mindset for it. I think that I have a lot of interest, and I'm not particularly fearful of moving into the unknown. I think I have the same respect for the outdoors and the unknown, but at the same time, I want to find out, and I want to go out and I want to take a look at it and see what we can bring to light.
I'll tell you what, Dave, if we had more researchers out there in the field like you, I think we would definitely be a lot more successful, so I wish you nothing but the best on that. And so that you know, I'm going to reach out to Jody Cook and let him know about your interest in becoming a member of his organization and hopefully help see this through.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm definitely interested. I definitely want to contribute as much as I can. I think that we need to take a good look at this even more than we are and get people more interested in more than just one thing.
I really like your outlook on all this. Well, before we wrap this show, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, I think people need to be a little bit more aware when they go out into the woods. I don't want to scare anybody. I want to inject a lot of fear into a place that people don't want it to be, because the outdoors and the national parks and camping and all the outdoor sports are meant to be enjoyed, and I don't think we should be out there looking over our shoulders with any kind of a trepidation about doing what we enjoy. But at the same time, I think just like anywhere you go, anywhere on a city street or in your own neighborhood, driving, boating, wherever it might be, I think that you just need to be aware of your surroundings a little bit more. I think things are changing in the world, and maybe it's because we're opening up more areas that have been closed in the past, and we're exposing more things that we haven't had contact with before. Whatever the reason, I just think that when people go out there, do the things that they love doing, they just need to be a little bit more aware of the surroundings.
Very well said. Very good words. Well, Dave, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing the details of that experience with us and everything else that you shared with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vic. I really appreciate the chance to come on and talk to you.
Oh, you know you're more than welcome. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. In case you haven't noticed, the YouTube versions of each episode are the ones that premiere first now on Friday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern, and the podcast versions of each new episode don't premiere until the following Wednesday. So if you want to catch episodes as soon as you can after they come out, YouTube is your best option for that. Tonight's guest is Kyle Ross. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Hi, Vic. How are you?
I'm doing great, and you?
I'm doing good.
Good. Well, thanks so much for being here. Kyle, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Sure. My name is Kyle Ross. I live in a small little town outside of Ponca City, which is north central Oklahoma. I have been all around Oklahoma, moving different spots, going to school and things like that, and finally moved back home a few years ago and helped my dad start a business. I've lived in the woods my entire life, had no crazy experiences until I was about 15, and every time I go into the woods, I have to take a double take now, which if you're in a little town and that happens, everybody seems to know that you're scared of the woods, and that is not a good thing to have.
Well, after what happened to you that one night when you were 15, I could definitely understand you wanting to take that double take. But we'll get into what happened that night later on. After we had that first conversation, something very interesting happened. What did happen?
I got off the phone with you and was just kind of going about my normal routine, kind of picking up stuff around the house and watching a little bit of TV. And out of nowhere, my little Boston Terrier, Bailey, started going absolutely crazy. And she's never done that before. She'll bark if you walk up on her and startle her a little bit, but she has never gone, her hair was raised on her back, she was barking uncontrollably. And at first I thought maybe she's seeing her reflection in the window, or maybe me moving back and forth, she's seeing my reflection. So I kind of grab onto her and pick her up to show her that it was a reflection. And as I walk up to the window, I kind of see a black outline. I mean, it was darker than it was dark outside, and I've never seen that before. And about that time, I see yellow. I start to make out yellow in the window, and it kind of took me off guard. I kind of looked behind me to see if it was my lamp or if it was some sort of light reflecting from somewhere. I couldn't find it, and then I turned back really quick, and I just see these amber yellow eyes just staring at me. I think once it realized that I knew it was there, it bolted. I had never been that terrified in my entire life. It was like the eyes were looking just straight through me, like it was trying to take me, is what it felt like. And my dog was still growling and barking, and I put her down and I kind of stepped away from the window, almost reeling back from it, and just total shock of what I had just witnessed. At first I thought, okay, I don't believe in coincidences. How did it know? How did it know that I had finally opened up about my experiences, and is this common, and almost gave like a supernatural element to it. And I don't know if that's the case or not, but definitely from that experience, it felt like it, because it was too much of a coincidence to just happen randomly. And what I do remember is when I saw it, it had one arm up, almost like when you grab onto something above you and you're getting ready to pull yourself up. That's kind of the motion it made. And then when I made the eye contact, and it realized that I was looking at it, or maybe it knew the entire time. I don't know. But as soon as I kind of realized what I was seeing, the outline with the eyes and the ears, and I didn't see any snout. It was just a solid black mass with huge ears, with one arm up, and then it dropped its arm, and then it booked it. Part of me wanted to go outside and look if I could see where it went, but the other part of me was saying, don't even do that. That's risking. That could be something bad. And my body was just screaming at me, don't look. Do not go and find out where that thing went, because whatever that was, it had bad intentions. And even talking now, just kind of flashing back to it, I'm kind of shaky and nervous because I've never had anything like that happen to me before. And that is something that shouldn't be there. And that, if it wasn't for my dog barking, who knows what would have happened. Maybe it was just looking, or maybe it was trying to figure out a way in my house. I don't know. But I'm glad I'm still here and I'm talking to you about it, because that was scary. That was sheer terror is what I felt.
Oh, I can understand. How far do you live from the closest woods, Kyle?
I would say the closest woods is probably a quarter mile, if that. The way our town is we're between two major highways, and a river cuts through right there. And in some parts of our town, the river cuts really close, and then in other parts, it cuts way a ways. So where I live, it's about a quarter of a mile, and that's a rough estimate. I don't know exactly how far, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, that is pretty close. To get to the woods that are roughly a quarter mile away, are the houses fairly widely spaced, or would it be kind of hard for it to make it to those woods without being seen because of it being a pretty tightly grouped clutch of houses?
My small town, the houses are pretty spread apart. I mean, some houses are closer than others, but from where I am to the woods, it's literally a straight shot down a barely used road. That's just one of many ways to get there. You could walk there and get there in less than 10 minutes, and you could go in between houses and nobody would even know you're there. A lot of people around here work for the oil field or work for Conoco, which is in Ponca City, and so they have crazy shifts around here. So there's a lot of times that people won't be home at night or during the day, and it's just kind of sporadic on who's home at night and who isn't. And so I can't tell you how many times as a kid I would sneak out of my parents' house and walk to the woods, and nobody would even know that I went into the woods. That's just how oblivious people are, really, of the outside, because it's a pretty tight-knit community. Everybody knows everybody, so it's not really high alert. It's just laid back. Everybody's here. Everybody knows each other, and it's quite easy to get straight in the middle of town to the woods, and you could literally do it without anybody noticing you. And that's just how it is, and that's how it's always been until I saw what I saw. And now every time I go outside, I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, hoping that I don't see it again.
Well, I can definitely understand you being so weary after what you've been through. Did you hear about anyone else in your neighborhood seeing it that night?
No, and that goes back into one of the bad things about a small town. Everybody knows everybody, and so if you come out and you say you've seen a dog man, people are they won't really say anything negative to your face, but we have old men that sit in the coffee shop and gossip. That's what they do. And so if you come out and you say, hey, I've seen something I can't explain, this is what it was, they may, to your face, say, oh, yeah, well, that's interesting, and then go to the coffee shop and say, did you hear about that crazy Roth boy? He said he's seen something. So it's not really talked about. There probably is more people in this town that may have seen it, but will never say they have. Just because it is a small town and everybody knows everybody, and it's just that way. It's always been that way. So if somebody does something, everybody knows about it.
I understand, but it still is a shame it's got to be that way.
Yes, it is. It's really sad because who knows what you could learn. Experiences like that, is there more people? My thought is children out at night. Is there a way that we could kind of know when there's a higher influx of these things, to keep kids inside? Because that is scary to me, that these kids are out at night and these things are out there that could take them in a heartbeat, and there's nothing they could do about it. And if some people would just talk about it, maybe we could learn more to keep kids safe.
Oh, I agree. You found that out the hard way 15 years ago, though.
Yes, I did.
You sure did. Did you hear any noises when you saw the dogman outside the window that night?
No, and that was probably the spookiest thing about it. I was completely oblivious to it, and I would have never known it was there if it wasn't for my dog. That was what was weird. When it ran, it's almost like it knew how to not make noise if it was running. And it was just quiet. It was just a solid movement, and it was gone, and no noise, no nothing, just absolute silence. And that was incredibly eerie. I've never heard an animal run that fast and not make a noise. And, I've been out in the woods. I know when deer run, they make noise. When squirrels run, they make noises. Rabbits, as small as they are, they run. You hear them. But this thing was just quiet. Nothing. It just whoosh, gone.
Where this happened in Oklahoma this time of year, it had to be pretty warm. I know it was nighttime, but was the window open to help cool the house, or did you have the AC running and the window closed?
Well, that's what really took me back, was that night, for whatever reason, they were closed. I normally, because right now in Oklahoma, it's really nice at night. And I normally have all my windows open and let the air come in, get fresh air. But that night, they were closed. And that's why it hit me that maybe my dog was seeing her reflection. So I thought, okay, well, she must not be used to her reflection because she's still a young puppy. So whenever I looked, I saw her looking up, and I thought, okay, I have the windows closed. She's looking at a reflection. She's just barking at a reflection, or me walking back and forth. And they were closed. And normally they would have been open. And to be completely honest with you, thank God they weren't open, because no telling if that thing would have came in or not. And if it would have came in, there wasn't anything I could have done about it. It was just so massive. And for whatever reason, they were closed. And I can't give you an explanation to why they were closed. They just were that night. No idea why.
Did you find any footprints outside that window the next day, or did you look for any?
No, and I was so disappointed because I am all about physical proof. I went outside and I looked and I looked. We had a light rain, so it was a little, it wasn't muddy, but the ground was damp. But when I went out and I was looking for footprints, in between where the window that it was in is where I normally have my boat parked. But it was pulled out because it was getting worked on. And it's a little area that's about, I would say, 6-7 foot across and about 15 foot deep. And so where it was inside my privacy fence area. It doesn't have a roof on it. It's open, but it's got two sides of privacy fence. So when I went in there, I was hoping that I could find a footprint to send to you, actually, because I told you about that because it really shook me up, and I was looking everywhere. But what I did find was where, I don't know what kind of grass it's called. It's like a long stem of grass. I think it's actually a weed, but it's got a diamond tip on it. And when I looked in there for the footprints, I noticed there was one patch of that grass that had been knocked over, like something had stepped on it. And whenever you grow up in the woods and you're hunting, you have to kind of look for those kind of things whenever you lose blood trails. And so when I noticed that, I really focused in on that area trying to find footprints around it. But there was absolutely nothing. It's like it knew not to step on the dirt, but to step on the grass. And whether that was by chance or whether it knew that, I don't know. But the grass was knocked down, and there was definitely something standing right there. And it had to have been something heavy because it broke off at the base of it. So that, to me, shows a level of intelligence that, quite frankly, is terrifying. You know, if it knows not to leave as less amount of evidence as possible so you can't track it, that is scary. That is way too smart, and that should not be.
Oh, I agree. Looking the way they do, being as intelligent as they are, just doesn't get any worse than that. Who else was home when this happened?
I was actually home by myself. My wife works at night for a nursing home, and so I happened to be home that night by myself. I don't get spooked easy. I just was watching TV, doing my normal routine, was actually kind of excited after I talked to you to get that off my chest finally, what my experiences were. And so it wasn't like I was sitting there huddled in a corner scared about it. That wasn't the case, which you can explain later on with my first encounter, which is why I didn't feel that way. So I wasn't psyching myself out or anything like that. It was just a normal night. I was cleaning up. I was just doing my own business, you know, and just not scared, not even thinking to be looking out the windows. It was just a typical night. And so I was by myself. I wish I wasn't, because it's always better when you have two people see it. But at the same time, I'm glad she wasn't home to see that, because she's never seen one, and I don't want her to. It's not worth showing that they exist to terrify somebody like that. To me, it's not worth it. You know, I would much rather her be blissfully unaware than see it and be terrified to go outside. I don't want that for her. So, in a sense, I'm glad I was home by myself, but on the other hand, I wish somebody else was there to see it. Because you do, I mean, seeing it even more than once, you still think you're losing your mind seeing these things, because everything in your head is telling you that should not be there. That should not exist. And yet it does. And so, yeah, I was, you know, like I said, I was by myself, but honestly, I'm thankful that I was.
Well, that says a lot about your character, the fact that you're so other-directed is to be glad that your wife wasn't there when you had that experience. I'm really impressed.
Well, thanks. I try. That's part of the reason why I'm giving this interview, is hopefully to, in a way, help people, but then also hopefully bring awareness to this, because it's there. It is out there. And I don't care how many people come up and say you're seeing things, or, oh, that's just a figment of your imagination, whatever. And no, it's there. It's a thing. It is a physical thing that exists, and it's terrifying. So it took me forever to tell anybody about it. Now that I have, part of me hopes that somebody listening will step forward and give their account, so maybe we can figure out what these things are exactly.
Well, I'm so glad you are coming forward and talking about your experiences. It definitely does help. After you had that recent encounter with the dogman at the window, you told your dad about your experiences with them. He had a strange response to you letting him know about them. What was his response?
Well, to kind of give you a little bit of a background on how my dad is, he is a very stern individual. Not in a mean way. He's just very quiet, and when he says something, he means it. So he's hunted his whole life. He taught me everything I know, and when I told him, he was the hardest to tell. To be quite honest with you, it was the most nervous I've been telling somebody something I think I have ever been, because I respect my dad so much. And so when I approached him about it, the first thing I said was, "Hey, I had this encounter. What do you think?" And he said just a very simple sentence. He said, "Well, there's things out there that you just can't explain, and there's big things out there that shouldn't exist." And that was it. That's what he told me. So whether he has seen them or not, I don't know. But judging by what he said, he's seen something. He just doesn't talk about it. To me, it's kind of bugging me, because I want to know if he's seen these things. But at the same time, he is that kind of individual to where he said that, leave it alone. Don't push it, or he may shut down, or he may actually say something. So there's no in between there.
Having him answer you that way, it sure does raise more questions than answer questions you might have had.
Yeah, absolutely. Because usually when he answers me, it's exactly what my question was. That was completely opposite of his normal demeanor. You could kind of tell when I asked him that, it kind of took him off guard, but he's so hard to read. I don't know how off guard it was. And then he said it and continued to watch TV like nothing had happened. So I got up and I left. So yeah, more questions than answers for sure.
That is a pretty strange way to answer your question. It sure does make you wonder what he might know about them or what he might have experienced, but I guess we'll never know.
Hopefully one day he'll tell me, but I don't know. He's just that kind of person.
Yeah, time will tell. How important is it to you to get the word out about dogmen being real now?
Like I said, it's one of those things to where it's very important to me, first of all, because these things are out there. You can find evidence of it. All these eyewitnesses can't be just seeing nothing. You know what I mean? It's just so, it's an area that we need to figure out what is going on there, because if there is a predator like these out there, we need to be aware. I know they're out there, but other people who don't kind of go blissfully into the woods and may not even know that they're being stalked. How many cases has there been of missing hunters? How many of those are dogmen? Maybe they just got lost in the woods, or maybe there was a predator out there that got them. To me, that's enough of a question that needs to be answered. So that's why I finally came out and told somebody about it, because this is something we need to find out what they are, because there's more research into Sasquatch and Bigfoot than there is in this. I think just because people can kind of at least understand Bigfoot, to where these things shouldn't exist. They should not be anywhere but in a movie. But yet, here they are. They are here. And so, yeah, to me, it's very important getting the word out, and not so much warning people in the sense that, hey, don't go out in the woods ever again, but get it out so people are aware out in the woods that these things are out there. It's just like bears. People know bear are out there, but they still go hunting. I don't know how similar they are to bears, but at least knowing that something's out there can kind of prepare you for it when you go hunting or when you go hiking or whatever. I think it needs to be studied more so we can understand them, because they are terrifying. They shouldn't exist. and they do, so we need to figure them out.
Yeah, they definitely have a monopoly on the word terrifying. There's no arguing that point.
Yes, they do. They are terrifying, absolutely.
Yes, they are. All right, Kyle, let's talk about this encounter you had about 15 years ago. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Sure. One day I was out. It was about summertime. It might have been early summer because we weren't in school. I don't remember the exact date, but I was outside with a friend of mine, and he didn't tell me that I could release his name, so I'll just refer to him as my friend. So we were outside. We were talking. He lived across the street from my parents' house. And so it was kind of getting late, so he had to go home. Well, we were outside, and he kind of turned. He couldn't even get words out. You know, he turned, and he just kind of, his eyes got huge. I mean, huge. And I kind of saw that, and I thought, well, that's weird, you know? And so I turn, and I see this shadow at first. I just see kind of a head, and then it kind of comes out going west, and it's slowly walking, but it's crouched kind of like a cat when it's stalking, but it's got its nose straight down to the ground like it's smelling something. I see it walk, and the first thing that comes to my mind was, that's not a dog, that is huge. And I kind of just freeze, like, what on earth am I looking at? I can't explain it. And it just kind of, it doesn't trot like a dog. It glides, almost like a cat. But it was canine. It was all canine. You know, you could see the big muzzle, you know, the big pointed ears, the big tail, fluffy tail. The thing about that is we don't have bear in my area. We don't have wolves in my area. No big predators other than coyotes. And I've seen coyotes. I've seen coyotes my entire life, and they don't get that big. This thing was massive. I mean, absolutely massive. And I just remember thinking to myself, am I seeing things? Is this real? Surely somebody's playing a prank on us or something. Your mind is just racing on, what is this? I was quite a ways away from it. About a block and a half is where my parents' house is from the corner, and it's actually on the corner of the church, the Catholic church we have here in town. And they have a light by the front door of the church. And that's the light that it was going under. And so, as it's walking, it's just so feline as far as movement is concerned, but so canine looking. It's very bizarre. And like I said, I knew it wasn't a coyote. I knew it wasn't a wolf. I knew it wasn't a bear. And I knew it wasn't a mountain lion because it had none of their features. I know what bear looked like. As a kid, my dad and I and my uncles would go up into Colorado and hunt. So I know what bear looked like. I know what mountain lions look like because they're around here and I've seen them. This thing looked nothing like any of those. And it's so shocking, but yet some part of me was so curious to figure out what this thing is. And that was, I guess I could say I'm a bit fortunate up until my last encounter that I was more curious by it than I was scared by it. And I wanted to figure out what this thing was. And I hear stories on your show all the time about people's first encounters and how terrified they are. I wasn't terrified. I was scared because I didn't understand what I was looking at, but I wasn't terrified. And so part of me really wanted to explain what this thing was that I was looking at. And I didn't know about dogmen or anything supernatural at that point. And watching it, I was just so fascinated by it. This thing should not be in our area. I know it's not a bear. I know it's none of those things, but it's right in front of me, and it could be something unknown. I was curious. I was curious. I was scared, but I wasn't terrified, but more curious than anything. And I just remember looking to my friend after a few minutes had gone by, and it was heading straight into town. I mean, straight into town, because the road it was following goes right to downtown. And of course, it's a small town, so it's kind of a ghost town up there. Once 5 o'clock hits, everybody goes home, and there's no businesses open downtown. And so it was heading that way. But, after it kind of walked into the shadow, I lost track of it. It was going towards downtown, and I looked to my friend, and I said, "Did you just see what I saw?" And he said, "Yeah, it looked like a huge wolf." And I said, "That's exactly what I thought," because he knew what coyotes look like, too. And he turned to me and just was in shock, I think. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to go home because whatever that thing is, I don't know if it's still around here. I'm going to go inside." And he went inside. And what I did, I don't recommend doing this at all, but what I remember doing is being so captivated by it that I walked up onto my porch by my front door, hoping it would walk back. And I stood there for maybe another 10, 15 minutes, hoping I could see it again. And I never did, and it was late. I didn't want to get grounded for being out too late or anything like that. So I went ahead and went inside and didn't tell anybody about it other than my friend. We kept that secret for, 15 plus years, a long time. And he still doesn't like to talk about it. I broached him on the subject not too long ago because I was thinking back on all this before I spoke to you, Vic. I was watching your show, and so I called him and asked him if he remembered it. And he's actually Native American, and so I asked him about his tribe and legends on them to see if anything even like that existed and legends for him. And he said not that he knows of, but he's not really big into their ancient culture as far as like stories that were passed down. He knows just enough to where he kind of feels comfortable with it. But I asked him, I said, "Do you remember that night?" And he said, "Yes, I remember it." And I said, "Well, tell me what you remember about it." And all he said was, "I remember it was terrifying." And he was terrified by it, but it didn't strike me the same way. And so I asked him if he wanted to talk about it, and he said no. So he remembers it, but he still won't talk about it. So it definitely hit him harder than it ever did me. So I can't explain it. It's one of those things. As time went on, I thought maybe I shouldn't tell anybody because it sounds crazy. Nobody's going to believe me, that sort of stuff. And then I happened across your channel, and then I kind of built up the confidence to talk to you about it. And so after I did, you helped out a lot as far as getting it off my chest and wanting to make other people aware, just because it had been so long, and thinking that you're insane for all those years, and then finally hear other people talk about it. It was a relief to finally tell somebody and they believe you. And that is probably what was the hardest thing for me to swallow, was telling people and that they may not believe me. That was harder than the experience at that time, because I wasn't terrified. I was, like I said, more curious than anything. So telling people what I saw was harder than the experience itself. And I wonder if that is the case for a lot of people. If them telling somebody is just as traumatic as the incident itself.
Oh, sure, for a lot of eyewitnesses it is. But after having done that, for almost all of them to a person, they feel so much better.
Yes, and it is. It's a huge relief. And I have to thank you personally. Whenever I talked to you that first time, you gave me an analogy about a highway, and people living in tribes in the Amazon, they don't know what highways are, but you telling them they're a real thing doesn't make it any less true. And to me, I've kind of kept that in my head, and I've told important people to me about my incident, not really caring about the not so much not caring, that's not the word, but less concerned about the repercussions. And so far, everybody I've told, they believe me because they know I'm not the kind of person to make up wild stories to get attention. I'm just not that kind of person. And that's my dad in me. He doesn't tell stories to get attention. And it was so relieving telling people you care about that this happened, and whether they believe it or not, their support is still there. And I think that's important for people to move forward, is to know, even if you tell somebody and they don't believe you, but as long as they support you, that's good enough. And there are people out there that will listen and know that what you've gone through and have gone through the same thing and do believe you, and you have their support as well. And that to me was a huge realization. I didn't realize that they were as common as they were.
Unfortunately, they are. And you make some really good points about talking about experiences. It might not seem like it at the time, but almost every time you talk about an encounter that you've had with one of these things, you will grow from that and benefit as a result.
Absolutely. I believe that 100%. It may be terrifying, but having support will help you cope through it.
Oh, sure. It might not seem that way at the time, but I really do believe that's how it is. When you first saw that dog man in the street, how far was it from you in feet?
I would have to say probably 500 feet, maybe, max. And in between probably 400 and 500 feet, I would say, roughly.
I think one of the reasons why it was so easy for you to get over that first encounter you had 15 years ago was because of the distance between you and that dog man. If you would have had this most recent encounter back then where it was so close, I think it would have been a lot harder for you to get over.
Absolutely. Whenever I talked to you, I was still more curious than anything. But after seeing what I saw in the window and that, I don't want to say murderous intent, but you can tell it's not good intent, that changed everything for me. It was a completely different feeling than the first time. And I will never forget the first time how I felt compared to what I felt when I saw it in the window. They're night and day differences.
Oh, I can understand that. With regards to size, how did that first dog man compare to the one that you saw recently at the window?
They were, I would say they were roughly the same height. The one down the street, I would say it was on all fours. The one in the window was kind of crouching a little bit. I don't know how to explain how it was crouching. Almost like, this is going to sound really nerdy of me, but almost kind of how Spider-Man sits on some of the comics, where his hands are in between his legs almost with his legs out. It was almost like that, other than one hand was up, almost like it was getting ready to jump. The outline of the leg, no, I couldn't see the whole leg, but it was the top part of the knee. And the way it was setting was almost like it was getting ready to jump with one arm up, almost like it was grabbing something to get leverage to jump. I couldn't see the feet, but it was big enough to where you could see the knees, and the angle I was at, I could see it. The one down the road was on all fours, very canine-like, but walking very feline. And so As far as size goes, I would have to say they're about the same size. If I had to guess, even though it was kind of bent down, the one in the window was maybe 6 foot or 7 foot, somewhere in there. I couldn't give you an exact height. The one down the road was probably about the same in length. The shoulders, I'm going to say from the bottom of its feet to the top of its shoulders on all fours, 3.5, 4 foot, maybe. I wouldn't even say 4 foot. I would say 3 to 3.5 feet, maybe. That's a rough estimate, but I would think that they were about the same size.
I'll bet it was hard to estimate the size of the dogman at the window that night because of its posture, but with your Spider-Man analogy, I think I've got a pretty good idea of how it had positioned itself. Understand, if it was a canine-type dogman, they don't stand straight-legged the way a hominid like a Sasquatch or a human would, with their knees kind of angling out forward because of the hocks they have underneath them. It could kind of look like they're in a somewhat of a squatted position. So maybe that's what you were seeing that night, and that's why you described it as having kind of a Spider-Man-ish appearance when it was hunkered down there looking in at you. About a year after that first experience you just told us about, you were fishing on the Salt Fork River when something interesting happened to you and some friends. Please tell us about what happened that night.
Sure. I was on the river with a couple of my friends. We were catfishing. We had a couple of limb lines out. We were just having a good time, just hanging out, being kids, by a campfire, fishing, having a good time. Well, I would say we were there probably 2 hours, and out of nowhere, I mean absolute nowhere, we hear a scream that the only way I can explain it was a woman getting murdered is the only logical thing that I could tell you is what it sounded like. That was freaky in and of itself, and we just kind of stopped and looked at each other like, did that really just happen? You know, what was that? And as soon as we kind of get our thoughts together, we hear something incredibly heavy hit the water. I mean, you can tell it has weight. And on the river, of course, there is mud that will come loose on the side of the river and splash, but this was a completely different sounding kind of splash, and it's hard to explain unless you've heard it before, but it sounded like something jumped in, but it was something heavy. And as soon as we heard that splash, we were all scrambling trying to figure out what it was, and I grab a flashlight and I shine it over to where I thought the noise was, and I start scanning the water. And then another one of my friends kind of walked down the bank a little bit, not very far from us. He wanted to stay by the fire, and he was shining his light, and he yells out, "Eyes." I didn't know what he meant by that. I said, "Eyes? What do you mean?" And he said, "Eyes in the water." And he was shining his light, and I turned my light, and we see these yellow eyes, yellow amber eyes, and they were reflecting from the light, but almost like they had their own power source. I don't know how to explain it, and it's so they were so what's the word I'm looking for? They stuck out of the water, and it was like they had their own power source. And they were so unique and so obvious that it took us all by surprise, because we have all of my friends that were there, we have all grown up in the woods. We knew what was out there, and we've never seen anything like that. And so we literally just drop all of our stuff, and we hop in the truck, and we recline the seats back and hide. And I know that sounds like kind of a coward thing to do, but we didn't know what else to do, because typically we would take rifles down there with us just in case. But that night we hadn't, because there was something coming up that my dad didn't want us to take our rifles out there and cause a bunch of noise. So we were sitting out there, we were fishing, having a good time, thinking that we're just going to be catching fish. We're not going to need any rifles, so we didn't even bother with it. But as we were sitting in the truck, we just were praying that we had a rifle in the truck, but we didn't. And we just sat there. And I can't tell you how long we sat there, probably 30 minutes, but it felt like days. We didn't see anything. We didn't hear anything else. And we kind of slowly get up, and I think it was my friend in the passenger seat, because I was in the back seat, and he gets out and kind of looks around, jumps back in the truck, and tells my other friend, "We're gone. Let's get out of here." We left all of our stuff on the bank and didn't even come to get it till the next day in the middle of the afternoon. And so all that stuff was the least of our worries. The only thing we could think of was how terrified we were of something in the water that was swimming across the river, and it was coming to our side of the river. So we just left our stuff there. We said we'll worry about it in the morning. And that was terrifying, but, I didn't really think too much about it until I started hearing about other encounters, and how I even heard somebody, I think on your show, talk about how sometimes they'll mimic noises. And it almost sounded like a scream for help, but it was a scream like they were getting murdered. That's the only way I can explain it. And as we were coming back the next day, we were looking everywhere for explanations. Maybe we heard a barn owl. Well, no, barn owls don't sound like that. Maybe we heard a coyote. No, coyotes don't make that noise. So we just kind of chalked it up to something we didn't understand, but something that was out there that we didn't understand. It was scary because you don't understand. That was absolutely scary. But until recently, I haven't made the connection hearing other people's encounters about how they'll mimic children screaming or women screaming to draw you into the woods. I don't know if that's what it was doing or what the purpose was, or if it was to scare the hell out of us and get out of there, which we did. Because when you hear something like that in the middle of nowhere, complete darkness, you don't mess around. You don't say, "Oh, whatever, it was a scary noise." Typically around here, you're armed, so you feel safe. But that night we weren't, and that noise was just, it gives me chills even today thinking about it. I've never heard that sound before or since that time.
Oh, I'm sure it's a sound you're never going to forget.
No, absolutely not. And like I said, I wish I could explain it better, but that's the only way I know how to explain it.
When you saw those eyes out there in the water, how close were they to you, and did it look like whatever owned the pair of eyes was moving, or did it seem to be in the same place and static?
I would say it was probably 70 yards from us, 60, 70 yards, something like that, because it was right before the bend in the river. And so it was swimming diagonal towards us. And so, of course, obviously, we couldn't find it at first, and then my friend kind of walked down a little ways and then just happened to catch the reflection in his flashlight, because where it was at is kind of a bend, and then it curves off real hard, but I don't know if it jumped before the bend. But the thing about it is that the river was moving pretty quick, and so whatever was in the water had to be pretty dang strong to swim up the current towards us at a diagonal angle upstream in a river. And it, like I said, it just had to be strong, because people don't really stop and realize that when water's moving, it is a lot of force, and whatever it was just swam. Like it wasn't even phased by the water. And it was probably 70 yards and probably made 5-6 yards towards us before we bolted. It was that fast.
Ew. Yeah, that's making pretty good time. When you see eyes in the dark like that, the last thing you want to see is them moving towards you. That's awful.
Yeah, it was terrifying. I couldn't really make out what it was. I just remember the eyes and the scream so vividly. I've never heard a noise like that, and I hadn't seen eyes like that before. Because even whenever I saw the Dogman the very first time, I couldn't make out any kind of color in the eyes or anything. But that night on the river, seeing those eyes, the color is a pretty yellow, amber color, but terrifying at the same time because you've never seen a color quite like it, but it's terrifying seeing that in the water coming towards you and that they are obvious eyes. And it's not like it was an alligator or anything. You know, there are no alligators in Oklahoma. It's way too cold for them. So that wasn't what it was. And so, but yeah, that was absolutely terrifying.
Oh, I'm sure it was. But the only thing worse than seeing a pair of spooky eyes like that in the night is seeing a pair of spooky eyes like that are focused on you. That's horrible.
Yes, yeah, and I wasn't waiting around to see what it was or if it was trying to come after us or if it was just trying to scare us. I didn't care. I wanted out of there. But whenever we got in the truck, the only thing we could think to do without drawing a lot of attention was to just kind of sit back in the seat and just freeze because every muscle in your body is just like, you know, you're going to stay right here until this thing passes, and your brain is just racing in absolute terror.
Yeah, I don't blame you guys for wanting to get out of there. About 2 years ago, you were in your deer stand when something strange happened. Please tell us about what happened that day.
Like I said before, you know, I spend a lot of time in the woods hunting and things like that. I love to get out in nature, and I should say used to love to get out in nature and listen to birds and just kind of listen to everything around you. But this particular day, it was towards the beginning of deer season, rifle season, which is about a week long, and I was sitting there, and it wasn't particularly chilly that day. I just remember kind of just sitting there comfortable. I wasn't freezing or anything, and all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, I hear crashing through the woods. I mean, just loud, loud noises. And at first, I thought that maybe it was somebody that was hunting with me out there that was making the noise. So I kind of just sat there, you know, didn't really think too much of it, just kind of thought that it was weird. And then it sounded like it was moving away from me. And so I figured, okay, they're going to go sit back down somewhere else and because they saw me or whatever. And then it was quiet. And then next thing I know, I hear crashing in front of me. And whenever I heard that, the first thing that I thought was, okay, that's just weird because if that was somebody hunting, they know I'm in here because they clearly turned around. And it's not like I was enclosed in anything. I was just setting up on a tree, and there's no box around me. Whenever you're hunting during rifle season, you have to wear blaze orange, a vest, and a hat. So I knew whatever was down there, or whoever was down there, saw me. Well, then I hear it in front of me, and I thought, that is really strange. And then I noticed that it's moving fast, and it's a little ways away, and then I see a deer break out of the woods, because where I sat in this little stand, it's almost a perfect circle, and there's small trees in this circle, and then everywhere else around you is tall trees. And so you don't really have any kind of block view in this kind of circle. Well, I see the deer break through, and typically, whenever deer are spooked, they're on high alert. They're running for their lives. This thing ran by me like it didn't even care that I was there. And that really took me off guard, because I've seen them where they'll run and then kind of run towards you. They'll stop, notice you, and then switch directions and run a different direction away from you. Well, this thing was booking it. It ran past me, didn't even care I was there, and I'm still hearing this running, and then it stops right before the woods end. I can't see what it is. It's kind of back in the trees, but it was smart enough to know not to come out of cover like it was something that was stalking the deer, and it just stopped. And that really took me off guard, because that's smart. That takes a level of intelligence that coyotes don't have. They'll run and run and run and run and run. And this thing was stalking, and it stopped, knowing that if it would come out of the woods, it would blow its cover. And then it was just dead silence. I mean, absolute silence. No birds, nothing. Because usually you hear squirrels in the background doing their little chirps that they do, and birds, and all kinds of just nature around you. But it was silent. I mean, pure silence. And I've never had that happen before. I sat there, and I remember grabbing my rifle and looking down the sights to where I thought I heard the noise, and looking for blaze orange, because I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe it's somebody playing a trick on me. You have so many things running through your mind, and I'm sitting there, and I'm waiting, and it's silent. And then it's like whatever was there just kind of vanished, because slowly birds started chirping again. Then you heard the squirrels running about, and that was bizarre. That has never happened to me my entire life. I've been in the woods, and literally as far back as I can remember going with my dad, the woods are alive. They constantly make noise, and you hear stuff. It's alive, and that silence is so weird and so off-putting, because whatever's causing everything to be silent is way up the food chain compared to you, because even with you walking in the woods, birds will still chirp, squirrels will still run around, and rabbits will run around. But whatever this thing was, everything in the woods was afraid of it. And to me, that is terrifying.
Oh, sure it was. For some time now, I've wondered what's behind that whole the woods going silent thing. I just can't understand it or explain it. When all this was going on out there that day in the woods, did you smell anything unusual?
Not that I can clearly remember, because your brain's kind of smelling for deer, and deer have a certain scent, especially right around rifle season, because, they're running everywhere. You have bucks that are chasing doe early in rifle season, and then that kind of stuff going on. So you're focused on deer. I don't remember smelling anything that really stuck out to me. I do remember, though, seeing something weird walking in. Was a dead coyote that none of us had shot, and it smelled terrible, like it had been dead for a long time, but it wasn't rotted, because when an animal dies and it starts to rot, it bloats. Well, it hadn't been dead long enough to bloat, so it was a fairly fresh kill, and I remember smelling just death in the air, and then walking into the woods. I do remember that, but as far as when I was in the tree, I don't remember anything. I think I was so shocked by everything that was going on that I wasn't registering smell. I honestly have to say I don't remember a smell.
Well, there might not have been one, so no one could hold that against you. Did you ever hear about any of your friends having any experiences like that in that woods after you had that experience that day?
No, it's mainly my family that hunts in there, and they never really say anything weird has happened. Or the main thing is when we come back out of the woods, we all meet at my grandma's and we eat supper, and they talk about seeing a deer trail there or finding scat here, that kind of stuff. But they never mention anything weird. So if they seen something, they're keeping it to themselves.
Yeah, that could very well be. One of them might have seen something and kept it to themselves, and we'd never know about it. Speaking of your friends, though, a friend of yours and 3 other guys were walking down a road in Ponca City when they had an interesting experience. What happened that day?
They were actually walking on pecan, I think is the name of the road. I know it's some kind of nut, and it's right outside of Ponca Lake. They were walking down the road, and they had they said it sounded like something messing with trash cans. And so they stopped when they noticed a shadow run by really quick. And that's all they told me, that they saw a huge shadow that was way faster than any human can run, and that they heard it messing with what they thought were trash cans. There's people out there that fish a lot and they throw fish guts in the trash cans, or who knows what it was looking for. It ran and it scared them enough to where they ran the other direction. They always thought it was Bigfoot. They thought it was Sasquatch over there in Ponca City. But after I told one of my friends this about the Dogman encounters, he said, well, maybe that's what it was. He said, because it was fast. And they never got a good image of it, but they do remember seeing a shadow move quicker than any person can run. And they said that scared them. And to me, that's kind of a mild sighting, because you can kind of at least wrap your head around that. You don't know what it was, but it ran fast, and just kind of get over that. As opposed to seeing a dog man, I think they would have been a lot more terrified if it was in the light to where they got a good look at it.
Since they didn't see what it was that cast that shadow, we never will know for sure what it was, but I sure hope it wasn't a dog man. You bought a timber wolf. Did you do that as a coping mechanism for having that encounter that you had 15 years ago? Or if not, why did you buy a wolf?
I would say yes and no to a coping mechanism. Yes, in the fact that I needed to figure out whatever this thing was so different than anything I had ever seen before. But whenever I saw it, the only thing that registered in my mind was, maybe it's a big wolf. Maybe that's what it was. I got him because that night kind of sent me down a path to where I wanted to figure this thing out. And so when I got him, I would try getting him quite a ways away from me and then setting down and watching how he moves. He's an all-black timber wolf, and he moves different. The way the light bounces off of his fur seems completely different, and he doesn't move like a feline. He moves like a canine. And after noticing that, I thought, this isn't it at all. It couldn't have been a wolf, because whenever wolves move, they kind of do a trotting motion, almost kind of like a jog, even when their nose is to the ground smelling stuff. I've thrown things out there, and he's had his nose down to the ground looking for it. And the way he moves is completely different. And it just blew me away on the differences that I noticed immediately, like the lighting off his fur, because you can still, even with the quite a ways away from him, with a light on him, you can tell that he's a canine. And whatever that was, it was almost like the fur absorbed the light so it could blend in better. It's way off. And after getting him and realizing that, no, it's completely different, it took me back to the very beginning to where, what is this? Because this isn't right. I've seen dogs, I've seen coyotes, and wolves aren't native to where I live in Oklahoma, so they can't be that. Plus, having my wolf and watching him, the way he moves, to compare to how that moved, was way different. And there are similarities as far as like features like the tail or the ears or the muzzle. The muzzle was a little bit shorter than what my wolves is, and it was more meatier, I guess is how I would explain it. It was bigger, but it wasn't longer. And it was almost like, you look at a wolf, you know they're designed as predators. But this thing was like looking at a super predator, is the only thing I could explain. The canine features, but the way it stalked was so cat-like and smooth that it was like it was built for one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to hunt. It was a coping mechanism because I figured once I got him and studied him, it would kind of relieve that childhood memory of finally understanding whatever it was I saw. But then realizing that it was completely different totally changed my perspective. And realizing that the unknown is still out there, and it is very real, and it is very, very different than even a wolf.
I can understand you buying him for the reasons you just explained. That does make good sense. Speaking of your wolf, where was your wolf and what was it doing when this dog man was looking in your window at you recently?
Well, this will tell you how much of a guard dog he is. He was asleep. So, and he was on the couch, dead asleep. I mean, he's really funny because he'll lay down, and once he goes to sleep, it takes a whole lot to wake him up. And he's used to my little puppy kind of getting in his face and doing her little play barks and stuff like that. So he just kind of ignores her. And when she was growling and barking, he was out of it. I mean, he was asleep. And part of me wanted to scream for him to see if, I don't know, if he could somehow protect me. I don't know how to explain that feeling. But at the same time, I'm really glad that he didn't, because if he did and if he tried going after it, I couldn't live with myself if something were to happen to him because of me. And that I am thankful for, that he was asleep. But he had no idea that was even going on. And after it had ran and I kind of calmed back down, I kind of shook him to wake him up and have him lay down in the floor so he can kind of keep an eye out. But after that, I didn't have any problems. So, yeah, like I said, he's a great guard dog, as you can tell. So
I'd say so. It sure sounds to me, Kyle, like he's pretty domesticated.
he is very domesticated, and he is a big teddy bear.
Yeah, sure sounds like it. Well, it's about time to close this thing out. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, if you're out there and you're not sure whether you should come forward or not, it's a good thing. It helped me move on and cope. Help me understand that there is so much in this world that we don't understand, and the only way we're going to find out about it is if you come forward and talk about it. And nobody's going to think any less of you if you come out and talk about what happened to you. It honestly is a good thing, and it is the only way inside that you're going to feel relief, because you're going to bottle it up forever and it's just going to eat you alive. And I would say, if you're going out hunting, I'm not saying don't do it, but what I'm saying is be careful. Because, again, there are things out there that we don't understand, and I hope that one day we'll be able to look back at all these interviews and have definite proof, a biological animal standing in front of us that everybody can say, that's exactly what I saw. And that is what kind of my purpose is of coming forward, is hoping that more people will talk about it. And I think it takes a very brave person to talk about such a thing that everybody thinks shouldn't exist. And again, nobody's going to think any less of you, and it is a good thing. And there are people out there who have been through the same thing who will support you. And I'm definitely one of those people. If you ever need somebody to talk to, Vic is a great person to talk to, and he helped me out a ton. So I would say, don't be scared, be brave, and we'll figure this thing out one way or another.
Very well said, and I can't tell you how glad I am to hear that our conversations did help you. That's really good news.
Yes, absolutely, 100% they helped.
I'm so glad they did. Well, Kyle, I can't tell you how happy I am that you came on and shared the details of these experiences with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vic, again for everything you've done and what you're continuing to do. It's good work.
You know you're more than welcome. Well, have yourself a great night.
You too, Vic.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.